Welcome to Leaders in the Arena. My name is Jenny Whitener, and I am the CEO of Bridge Innovate. For over 20 years, we've been working to empower leaders to think, lead, and problem solve differently for sustainable results. This series is designed to share valuable insights and lessons from our clients, our consulting network, and from leaders in the arena who are championing organizational growth to help you on your own growth journey. So today we're very excited to have you for Why Change Efforts Fail and How to Succeed with our special guest, Allie Robertson. In a moment, we'll be introducing you to Allie and be inviting you as you engage in today's session, whether you're listening by podcast or joining us for the live webinar. We would invite us on the webinar to introduce yourselves using the chat and to ask questions that we'll be doing at the end of today's session. So we are Bridge Innovate. We engage with leaders around improving their ability to think and solve problems with strategic planning, business innovation, human-centered design. We work with them in leadership development capabilities and to accelerate their change efforts. Today, as I said, enough about Bridge. Let's get to the real juicy part of today's session, and that's introducing Allie. So if we go on, I want to introduce you to Allie Bruce Robertson, who's a change management consultant, and I've had the pleasure to knowing for almost a decade. We've done some work together in a number of different arenas with large corporations and in small nonprofits and sort of community-based work, but it's so exciting to have Allie with us today. She is certified in a number of different capabilities in change, design thinking, in various aspects of leadership development. So Allie, thank you so much for joining us today. Please share with the group a little bit more about you.
Yeah. Hey, and thank you so much, Jenny. What a warm welcome. So excited to be here with you and everyone. Love the work that, you do and inspire for folks all across the industry. And so a little bit more about myself. You see some crazy pictures up here, I'm sure. After my 10 plus years in change management consultant and leadership development management, innovation and engagement facilitation, those types of work efforts, I have a couple other titles that I just really love and wanted to share with you all. I'm a mother of two incredible kids. I know that every mother feels like their kids are incredible. I get to experience that joy as well. I have a son who's 8 and I have a daughter who is 4, and you can kind of see them pictured there with my husband. They both got the curly hair cue, so straight from their mom. So we often call ourselves the curly crew, and lots of little fun things on the side with our family and community. I'm also a kids team leader and teacher with our church and several other community efforts that we have. I included a little picture about Jenny. You'll recognize this, and probably everybody will on the call here. We were building marshmallow towers one day, and I got to lead that session for the kids and really get to inspire them. And of course, they inspired me greatly with how creative they are. So I have a couple other things that I do as well. I love running. It's part of my daily habit and routine. I've been doing that for quite some time since cross-country efforts. I'm a lot slower today than I was in my younger days. But I also am a musician by trade, and my husband and I are looking at starting a coffee shop. So I'm a barista in training as well. So I have a whole bunch of stuff that I love to be involved in. With my background, I have a little bit of a creative streak in me. So my master's is actually in creative writing. I keep that habit of reading alive, and you can kind of see some things that I'm inspired by. I love to include those things right up under my picture. So I'm currently reading Change Enthusiasm by Cassandra Worthy. It's a recent publishment in 2023. I've really been inspired by that. I love the Double Win podcast lately by Michael Hyatt and Megan Hyatt, his daughter. And I'm looking into some poetry right now with Billy Collins and reading through musical tables. So I'm just excited to be here with you today, Jenny. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all on the other side of the screen here, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks, Allie. I mean, you just remind us how important it is to bring your whole self and all that you are to all parts of your work. And so thanks for sharing with us about your professional experience and about you personally, because it's really all those gifts that come together that make each of us an extraordinary leader in today's world. So thanks so much for that. And thanks for being here. Today, you and I talked about really digging into change and why change efforts either fail or succeed. And so I wanted to just start off with some highlights around patterns for successful change. You know, there's some research all across the board. You can see that coming in from McKinsey, you can see it coming in from IBM, from Towers Watson, most every major consulting firm talking about some of these patterns of successful change. Companies with strong leadership and commitment to change are eight times more likely to be successful with their transformations, reported by the Katzenbach Center. If you look at other key notes here, companies with highly effective communication practices during change are more than twice as likely to have a significant outcome and to outperform their peers. 77% of organizations believe that their investments in closing capability gaps led to positive outcomes in change initiatives, reported by McKinsey and Company. So also from Boston Consulting Group, the cost of ignoring or mishandling resistance to change can be up to 20 times higher than addressing it proactively. So often I think we get excited about some new capability, we get excited about where we're headed, and we are remiss about really implementing the planning and the execution around the change support system. So as we get started today, Allie, if we think about this, share with us your overview of the dynamics behind an overall organizational change approach. Talk to us about that. Give us the landscape here.
Yeah, and I appreciate you landing so much on those key elements there and patterns for successful change. Some of the things that I have seen work the best are when people and organizations can truly effectively design a change management system that really recognizes not only what is seen as change management, but kind of an undercurrent of what's not seen. So, Luke, if you'd actually jump on to that next slide here, I found this diagram. I know it's an age-old iceberg diagram. We've seen these for quite some time. I found this very effective as setting up models for change and trying to lead change efforts, being a change manager on enterprise-wide, programs and processes that need to be enacted. And I think that, around the landscape of change, you can pick any of them, right? You saw all the folks not named on the previous slide. You can follow ProSize change management model. You can follow McKinsey's. You can follow Deloitte. You can really follow any process as long as you're proactive about it. But I think the thing that people need to see and understand are the dynamics and the undercurrent of change management that we often overlook. So I just want to dig into this a little bit. And hopefully, when you're implementing change management, your people around your the project or whatever you're running, your people are going to see active and visible sponsorship. That's kind of a given as you go through any change management process or model, but hopefully your leaders are stepping up and they're stepping out to support that change. They're going to see those active champion networks. That's a tried and true thing that change management can do for you as you try to initiate something new and really see that rallying around a change initiative. And of course, they're also probably going to be seeing or be on the receiving end of those change communications and the metrics that go along with why are you changing things and how far along are you in the progress of that. So, but as I was talking, what's really, really critical are these things that are unseen. It's what people don't see that really can make change management very successful. And there's some really important dynamics, I think, that are critical to pay attention to if you're running change efforts. The first that I think about is change leadership coaching. And this skill set is so critical as you work with leaders and influencers across your organization. And the reason is because leaders are asked all the time to lead change every day. It's a part of their job. And so, with that, they jump into their normal habits, whatever those are, of leading. And so, with that, like we said, every day we all bring our whole selves to work. We all bring all of us to lead, whether we realize it or not. Um, Change leadership coaching can really help leaders see the blind spots that they may have or help them more navigate more effectively their communication style as they lead into a change. They can help them to build some emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence around how the change is actually impacting the boots on the ground or the folks or the stakeholders that they're engaging. And they can really act as that sounding board. So I think a key dynamic behind organizational change that makes it successful is to really invest in your change management leadership coaching, because that can really help all of your active and visible sponsorship go so much more smoothly if you make that investment ahead of time. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm
I
sure.
think it's great. I think it's great because, many times I think we think about change management as like a project with tasks and
Mhm.
activities. But I love the fact that you're bringing this coaching capability to the table to be the right hand of that leader so that they can really express their fears, their concerns, really be engaged with you about what's
Yes.
needed to enable the change. So, really important.
Yeah, and it really requires that dynamic relationship, right, between your change management and the project management and the leadership aspect of what you're trying to do. Because, if you put change management over in a box and you're like, okay, let's say Jenny, you and I are on the change, and let's just say, I'm like, Jenny, you just go lead the change, right? You just do that part and you do the process side of that. You're really just leaving so much on the table. So, as a leader, if you're open to what your change managers have to give you as advice, they're
Yeah,
often times looking at that the people side of change,
right.
not necessarily always the process side of change. So, yeah, that's a really critical aspect of that. And Luke, if you'll jump that slide back up there, I have one more thing I wanted to touch on as far as yeah, there you go. So I think the other piece that's really critical here is you can see proactive change partnerships, you can see risk planning and mitigation, adaptive planning. Those things are all behind the scenes that change management can do for you. But the cultural navigation piece is really critical as well. So, your change manager, the change management team that you lead alongside of this project, they're often going to be out there with the eyes and ears open for that people side of change. And there's all kinds of really great organizational assessments that evaluate not only the readiness for change, but the culture's readiness for change. And so, as you look at things, especially let's say you're going to implement a new technology, uh, the whole organization may be wanting that new technology, right? Their desire is high. They've got processes that are outdated, and they're like, oh my gosh, we have to have this new thing. But if the culture for change has been naturally resistant or there has been constant change here recently, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, you have to be able to assess that culture and effectively navigate through that internal culture so the change can truly be successful. So it's really about looking at that boots on the ground navigation of, yes, we might all really be excited about this, but what is our kind of change muscle? Can we really get through this? Or do we tend to get excited about it and then leave it, or let somebody else try to do it?
Yeah.
Or get frustrated, pretty easily. So that navigation is really critical too.
Yeah, I could see that by proactively assessing how will the culture either embrace this or kill it. What can we do to help navigate that so that there is buy-in it connects to the existing systems, I can see a really powerful play by using that lever of cultural navigation you've highlighted. Really interesting. Thanks so much. Great.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the next quote. You're all familiar with this. Jack Welch so poignantly coined this. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And I remember us talking about this, Jenny, way back when we were working on a critical project to redesign performance management. And it is still true to this day. If there's a rate of change that is really exceeding that culture's ability to change, your culture will inevitably kill it. It really will. You coined that so well, Jenny. And so I wanted to share some recent research as well in here in a minute on how you can really actually make sure that you're above the rate of change, right? That you have an ability to connect to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so often I think, Allie, we talk about the rate of change. We get leaders engaged in that. I remember when you and I were working together, we actually asked them in the room, we had a group of 30 leaders in there, and we said, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the rate of change you're experiencing in the market that the market's driving? And they gave us like, I don't know, a 10 plus or something. And we said, what's the rate of change inside the organization? And they were very pointed in saying, maybe a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. So they knew they were behind. When you think about that, talk to us about this, how do you avoid these pitfalls of and change initiatives failing? Walk us through this concept that you're bringing to the table on change fatigue.
Yeah, this is something that came to our table just within the last year, I would say, as I was looking at leading another transformation for the company that I'm at today. And the issue now, Jenny, it's funny that we talk about that, sitting in the room with our executives a couple years ago. It's more than a couple now. The rate of change has just increased so significantly that Gartner began studying a sense of change fatigue. And so, if you can even think back to the COVID days, right? People's willingness to change, they were following this way back when, was about at a 74%. So you can see that line on the graph up there. Their change willingness was about 74%. This was just a normal, like your ability to support change in an organization, move it forward, kind of, roll with the changes that you're seeing. Organizations were reporting about 74% willingness there. After COVID, you can kind of see where it takes a nosedive. So the willingness to actually support change after COVID dropped to 43%. So significant here. Inversely, the volume of change, of course, you all know this, right? It continues to escalate. So what Gartner is trying to get change managers to think about and look at is this sense of like the transformation deficit. We have a really big problem on our hands when it comes to transforming anything or even just making minor changes within an organization because people are tired. They're just fatigued. And so it doesn't mean that you should stop all change, and just call it quits, right? It does mean that there are just a couple of different, I would say, creative and unique strategies that are evolving on the change landscape in order to help you through this transformation deficit. So I was just really struck by that research that Gartner provided. And I think the other thing that I found really interesting, I was doing a little bit more reading. And if you're in HR on this call, if you're an HR professional, there's also, it seems to be an HR-wide industry transformation for HR that is happening in many settings. And if you're in HR, not only are you responsible for helping an organization transition or transform, whether that's through organizational design models, new ideas about performance management, new ideas about employee engagement and recognition, et cetera. You're not only responsible for leading the organization through that. Often what we're seeing now is HR organizations are going through their own reorganizations, their own identity transformation themselves. So if you're in HR, then you get the double change effect, the double transformation deficit. I'm a little nervous to say that that might be at 23% versus 43, but it really is a real, it's a real impact on how we show up to work, how your people and your change management efforts are able to exist outside of just the everyday norms. So things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah. And you talk about, I think you've got some ideas for us about how to combat this change fatigue.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Fly on to that next slide. There you go. So this is what I feel like, and I can send you guys the study that from Gartner, et cetera, that I've got on hand. But these are the three key points that I really took from it that were the creative ways to combat the change fatigue. And they talk at length about this in the study. But it might seem a little like, yeah, of course, Allie, like prioritize change management efforts by energy management. But what that really means, it's not just about prioritization, because we've all been in that space where everything's important, right? Everything's important. And then you're always hearing, well, what is the most important, right? How do you keep the main thing the main thing? And I think what's clear about this research is that they talk about change management as energy management. And so, really looking at it to prioritize energy around different aspects of the changes that you need to make. So, maybe something in the past, that would have taken a 10-step change plan really only needs a 3-step change plan in today's world, right? Maybe something that is small is actually going to take you a lot more time. So thinking about the energy and planning for that for people to put into. So just being really clear about where people need to prioritize their efforts and their energy is really critical. And I think it's something that we haven't necessarily looked at, I would say with a fine tooth comb. I can't say it now. Yeah, so that's one of the things. The second thing is to create rhythms of proactive rest. Would you believe that we're in an age where within change management, they're suggesting, hey, make sure that in your change management plan, you have a literal, hour or two, a meeting or a time set aside for your change team and the project team just to rest. Yeah. To recuperate, to encourage them to do that. And then not only encourage them to do that, but encourage their work streams to do that. So I think that's a really interesting way to do that. And there's all kinds of ways that you can get around that. All cultures are different about how they look at rest and how they value that. But I think that's really important to have in your system of change management in order to keep your team alive, right? And keep everything going. And then I think the final thing, we've seen a trend, I would say, of this over the last couple of years, but it really is important to try as much as possible to avoid the sheer top-down changes, but instead engage in a more open source change tactic to make sure that you're hearing the voice of your people as you go through change and ensure that their voice is valued by making sure that it's heard, throughout the whole process. And sometimes they're not a part, you don't have all the voices in the design necessarily, but you definitely have you need to be able to understand the sentiment of what is happening within change and how it's impacting folks. And that open source model helps leaders to really remind themselves to think about not only what they're trying to do with the change as far as the business goes, but how it's impacting their people from an
Hmm.
open source model.
It's very interesting you talk about this, these different tactics for combating change fatigue. I really like this, and I particularly am drawn to the fact of prioritizing change efforts by energy, and managing that. Recently, I was talking with a chief of staff of a very large financial services company. This person was telling me all about the change efforts underway on the HR side, the operations side, the sales side, all the digital transformation. And I got nervous just hearing about them all. And I
Yeah.
said, is anyone mapping the level of change impact across the organization? And as you said, starting to prioritize that so that you're not really taking your eye off the ball in terms of what you've got to do with your customers. At some point, you have to be able to manage that threshold. And that really takes me on to, I know we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Talk about some of the practical tips and strategies that people can be thinking about as they're leading change and how to ensure that that change is successful and sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can go on to that next slide too, because I think this is really critical when you think about exactly what you're talking about, Jenny. As much as you're feeling overwhelmed just listening to the amount of change going on, I believe that a way you can look at this is to really move people from why now, which tends to be that automatic response from a change fatigue perspective, to, okay, what's just the next step? How do we create and sustain change momentum? And I think that these processes and these moments of change can really just help you move through that and create the energy needed to get someone from one point to the other. And so, really, I think when you take it into bite sized pieces, with clearly communicating with only targeted audiences, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll blast out communications and we don't consider which audiences critically need to know this information now versus later. And I think staggered communications to targeted audience can really help you hone in and craft your change efforts. I
Mhm.
think investing in the change champion network and the change management team that you have is also critical. Using that structured process for change. I think the one thing with all the creative efforts is don't abandon a process for change. People still need the structure in order to move through different things and move through that to okay, let me see what's next. Let me
Right.
get that next step. And
Yeah.
then really just inviting engagement, addressing resistance head on. Those are some normal things. But I think if you can take it from a what is the next right step at this time for this particular audience or people that we're working with, I think it can really create some momentum and sustain your change.
Fantastic. And I know, in the next visual that we have for those who are live today, we talk about change readiness. Are people ready, willing, and able to go through the change? And I think the graphic that you shared that'll come out after the session with materials from today's session really helps people see those different components that help the organization and its people be ready, willing, and able. If we go on, I know that we just have another minute left. I want to give you a chance to talk about leadership and the framing of the role of leaders in successful change. If you could kind of wrap us up with that concept.
Yes, I think that this is so critical. Your change leadership, much like the culture, can make or break your change efforts. Your change leadership and your skill set around that is so critical. It can also make or break your efforts around change. And so, as I have worked over the years within change, these are some Allie brainstorms about the change leadership framework that might be necessary to really think about. And it's also based on some research, of course, as well, that I can send out. But I think the top priority is to remain curious. That curiosity in change leadership can help really provide a lot of momentum when you are considerate and you're in that space of being an open source and curious leader around the change efforts that you're leading. I think self-awareness is a really critical aspect of that. And that's where a lot of that change coaching comes into play. And it gives you the ability to model the new way in an effective strategy. The other key piece that I've seen and that's made leaders really successful has been around building support. I've just recently been involved in an effort around issuing a new policy. And in the past, policies have been really difficult to issue. If you guys are on the policy framework, you know how hard they can be to have. There's about 1 million stakeholders to involve when you're changing or doing something new with a policy. But because of the way our senior executive really actually built a coalition of sponsorship and leadership around the change, it's actually been touted now as one of the most seamless policy changes that have been made so far. So really, really cannot just stress that enough. And then I put this in as well to align energy and prioritize. I think that's going to be something that change leadership is going to be really looking at as far as making sure that all the efforts are in the right space and we're throttling, at the right time, and you're pushing the accelerator at the right time and you're hanging back at the right time. I think that's going to be key. And then, of course, something that is really, really critical is not being shy to share progress, no matter what. Getting out there, being transparent. It's been key for the past 10 years, I would say. But the need for transparency around what's changing and maybe even the ugly truth of what's changing, right, is also necessary and can do so much for change leadership and making sure that things are successful in that framework. So, yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Allie. We are at time. It's been a great session with you today with all the insights on change. I just wanted to let our audience know that for those who did register to join us for the session today live, you'll be getting a copy of some of the materials that were shared today. And then also you'll be getting a tool, the force field analysis, which is a great tool that we use a lot in planning and implementing change that we'll be sending out as a tool that you can use on your own. I hope that you've enjoyed today's session. Thank you, Allie, so much for being here with us. And I just wanted to share with you, you have a number of other sessions coming up at Bridge Innovate. If you, we've got information coming up on psychological safety with Brandon joining us to be the key thought leader in that. We've got a special interview with a guest host, Dr. John Plating, sharing insights from military leadership with Colonel Pat Rayner. Lots coming up on Bridge's Leaders in the Arena podcast and webinar series. So thanks so much for joining us today. We hope to see you all again very soon.
Awesome. And thanks for having me, Jenny. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure, always.